Hi everybody, it's Dr. Judith Collazo, and I'm going to talk about literacy text circles, fostering critical discourse and deeper understanding. I want to say a big thanks, shout out to Dr. Littner and the Center for Teaching Excellence for sharing these TenTalks. I've learned so much already and really appreciate having this means to make our classrooms better. So the why for literacy circles, which is what I'm going to talk about today, they're basically coming together, putting your students into groups to have critical discourse about what they're reading. So it's really important to think about the why, the developing of reading comprehension and critical literacy, so that students don't get their college career readiness skills. Many of them do not have this critical literacy that they need to really understand what they're reading, even by the time they graduate high school. So it's really our job to help them to get there and internalize what they're learning. So they improve reading comprehension, discourse, collaboration, and social interaction. So I love to use them in my classroom. So getting started, it's really important that it's all about empowering the students and keeping it's student-centered. So always allow for student choice. I'm going to give you some examples from my children's lit class. So they were able to choose a different, like juvenile novels, they would choose from a selection based on a theme that we were doing or a genre. Facilitate, don't dominate the discourse. This is student-centered, so you're there, and if you organize the groups well, you're really just an observer, watching them think and learn and teach each other. They foster reflection and comprehension. They promote, of course, critical literacy, discourse, and thinking. So how do you get this organized? Basically, select related literature books, for example, or text chapters or research articles for each group to read and discuss, and give them the choice so that they can select, and then you put the groups based on the choices that they made and related to the themes that are content that you're teaching. You create groups, usually of no more than 6, based on the different readings that are assigned. You create roles for each group member. You develop questions or themes to frame the discourse if needed, or you have the students do that prior to, and allow time to share out with the whole class. Some of the roles that you might have for your students are discussion director. That's someone that's leading the discussion. A lot of times that's you as the instructor due to time. Summarizer, that's someone that's kind of summarizing everything that this group has their main thinking of the group. The illustrator might be coming from the imagery that they got or the significant elements putting together, or maybe even drawing an illustration to demonstrate a concept, for example. The literary luminary is often those ones who are coming up with the quotes or the main, something that pulls out of the underlying themes of what they're reading. The connector is, again, someone's making these connections, maybe cross-textually. I have my students, because they're future educators in children's lit, the majority of them, they make text to text, text to self, and text to world connections, just like they would do if they were doing literacy circles in their K through 12 classrooms. The questioner is also the one that's asking questions as they read and then posing those to the group. Here's an example that I did with fantasy motifs activity. So we read fantasy juvenile literature models and I put them into groups. And then we had specific fantasy motifs. Here's 6 of the fantasy motifs that they could look at. And they would go through, they had their specific roles. So they were set with specific roles like the connection maker, the illustrator, the word wizard, and the questioner. And it all related to the fantasy motifs. They could relate to either one or all 6. Interestingly enough, for example, Wizard of Oz has all 6 of the main fantasy motifs in that. So sometimes the students came to that when they were in that discourse. So here I would give them all just a little laminated card with their roles, so they all knew what the roles were and made it easier for them. Another way to organize your critical discourse is to have them create some discussion prompts before they go in. So they were reading controversial juvenile literature. They were reading some controversial books like I Am Malala. The Hate You Give, they could choose. Esperanza Rising, for example. And what they did was I gave them the prompts. They had the 1 and 2, so they would pick out a quote that was pertinent, that really spoke to them, and give their interpretation and create a prompt from that. And then they'd create another prompt related to the theme of the week, which was the controversial juvenile literature. And then they would reflect on those after. So they would go into the discourse with 1 and 2, and then they would reflect in 3 and 4 on their peers' responses and then their own growth and evolution in thinking. So here's an example. We have a student who, she picked a quote from a book, Esperanza Rising, all about a Mexican girl who immigrated to the United States at the turn of the century with her family. So just having the student came up with a pertinent quote from there, and then she came up with a prompt making relating to the character, and then to how in the classroom and how you would use it, and how people treat others differently, maybe because of their color of their skin or because they don't speak the English language, for example, as fluently. They have an accent, those kind of things. And so how you would incorporate and eliminate this kind of issue in your classroom. So she made a prompt there. Then she created a prompt about how to overcome controversy. Are there any activities you could think of that would celebrate everyone's different cultures in the classroom and make everyone feel special and important in their own skin? Then she went back after the discourse and she wrote notes during the discourse and really kind of thought about and reflected on her peers and what they said and how that reflected what she thought in her own thinking. And then you go to closure. So sometimes with like a genre motif activity, there might be posters created and things like that and shared with the class. For some of the books we did, the students created memes. Like, for example, this one's from Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, a book about in the Deep South before civil rights, right? I believe it's the 1940s or 50s in the Deep South. From an African-American girl's perspective. And so it was really great for the students to create memes of the themes. We created virtual walls also. And we always have deep reflections in a multitude of ways, maybe even through voice threads sometimes if we're doing it online, those kind of things. Flipgrid videos. Here's another. So when you get to the closure, you could have a reflection on, for example, the fairy tale activity. We did one where we looked at the Red Riding Hood story from different cultures and how gender roles stereotypes are portrayed. And so the students really deeply reflected on how, for example, Pretty Salma, which is from West Africa, and then Lampopo, which is a Chinese version of this tale, how the protagonist is portrayed differently or similarly to the traditional European Red Riding Hood story, and how we deconstructed the gender stereotypes, and the students really reflected on the different stereotypes and how to deconstruct gender stereotypes and kind of dismantle them in their own elementary and classrooms. Here again, here's the final reflection from the student who read Esperanza Rising, one of the students. I knew there were difficulties and struggles regarding immigrants in the U.S., more specifically immigrants who look different than white. In the story, we are put in the shoes of a Mexican immigrant. The irony of it is that Esperanza's family were richer in Mexico than the people who treated them badly once they immigrated. And so she really, really thought about it, and she reflected, and she made a textual connection back to a book, Refugee, which is also about different children, fictional immigration experiences from different stories throughout history, times in history. So this was I hope that you you try this in your classroom and use these literacy circles. It's something that I always use in my elementary classroom, and it just translated so beautifully into the college classroom. I encourage you. I put some resources here. There's been several articles and research done related to how you can use literacy circles now in the college classroom and how they improve critical literacy, discourse, and thinking. So I look forward to future TED Talks, and thank you for watching.